Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Crime Centric. This being a show we're talking about crime dramas that I watch. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of Prodigal Son. A great episode. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Obviously, Malcolm's still dealing with the nightmares, and it's keeping him from sleeping. Even when he takes these new steps and figuring something out, it still hasn't fully resolved everything that's still boggling his mind about the woman in the box. And, you know, the thing of whether that was real, whether that was not, his dad kind of playing the whole mind games of like, oh, the fact of the matter is, why can't you remember, and all of that. So that is keeping him up, so he's not sleeping, so he needs a case. I even love him going to Gil. He'd be like, the only thing that brings me ease is homicide. And all the cops in the room look at him. He's like, solving them, not doing them. But basically, this particular case is actually a very tragic one. It's basically, it starts off what seems like might be a drug war. But obviously, it's like, no, this isn't just like a drug war, because the victim is this dude named Desir. But the fact is, his throat was slit, his tongue was cut. So it's like, okay, something's definitely up here, because obviously for Malcolm, he's like, this doesn't feel like, because this is supposed to, like, the fact is he's covered in what would have looked like coke or whatever. So it's like, if this was like some gang related thing, why would they waste $20,000 worth of product to kind of, you know, do that? What would be the whole symbolism for cutting out his tongue? Because this isn't cartel. This is like lower level, you know, gang type of stuff. And so, but immediately you can tell just by Danny's responses and just how she's handling this whole situation. It's like, yeah, this case is personal to her. For what reason? And it's actually kind of interesting because they visit the opposite to Desir, this dude named Saulo. Saulo brings up the fact is, hey, I'm not the one who killed Desir. It's actually kind of interesting because basically church is kind of like the middle ground. It's something that apparently like the cops and gangs kind of made it so like church is kind of like the sacred ground. It's kind of what's the term that would be used is Switzerland, essentially. They kind of be like the peaceful, like almost like a parlay type of situation. And I guess Gil has kind of made a lot of like approaches to like Saulo or just any gang related stuff to kind of keep the peace, you know, stop any bloodshed and stuff like that. So obviously, Saulo wasn't the killer behind this, but then he throws out Estime because it's like Estime was Desir's right-hand man, and the way the case ends up developing, it's like the person that was killed first was obviously, it's like at first it's like, oh, whoever it was, the guard let by first, and then Desir welcomed it in. So it's like obviously he wasn't, you know, on guard when this person killed him. So Estime being like his right-hand man seems like the likely suspect in all of this. And obviously, you know, Danny is, because obviously Danny gets a little testy because, you know, Malcolm starts pushing buttons. He's like, oh, the fact is you're narcotics, and that pushed a button for her because it's something she doesn't want to talk about, because it's like, don't, you know, try to profile me. She doesn't like that. But the fact of the matter is, it turns out her and Estime have a past, because when she was in narcotics, she was undercover, and basically there was a connection there. They were very close. So that's why for her it's like, I know Estime, he wouldn't be the killer in all this. And even Malcolm agreed, because he went to see he went there with her. And the fact of the matter is, like, looking at his reactions, the fact is he's playing the role of some gangster, like, oh, he's some big scary drug dealer, when it's like, no, that's not who you are, because you're having to play this role because it was a position that Desir had put him in. And the fact of the matter is, even being this scary like person, like, he's being very honest about the fact is that he's not the killer, but just his body reaction shows that he isn't, that because that's just something he's not capable of. But one of Saulo's guys shows up, starts shooting up the place, and unfortunately a whole bunch of drugs start flying into the air, and Malcolm gets high from it. And I love him being like, so why is everyone moving in slow motion? He's like, are you okay? Gil was like, are you okay? He's like, yeah. And he's like, you know what? You're the one person that filled that void in my heart. And he's having this heartwarming moment and stuff like that. And you have Gil being like, yep, he's high as a kite. And Malcolm's like, I am higher than a kite, which is so interesting. You'd almost think, well, but just because we know a lot of medications and stuff like that don't typically work on them. I mean, to be fair, we saw that in, like, what was that, the first or second episode, where it took a while for the medicine that the hospital had him on. I think that was the second episode, that it took a while for it to finally kick in. So I was wondering if the drugs would have the same effect. But to be fair, it was a shit ton of drugs, so it probably hit him really quick. So Danny's kind of stuck babysitting him, which is kind of sweet. And he's even bringing up the fact is like, oh, we're friends. She's like, we're not friends. And he kind of looked at her. She's like, I mean, we're not friends. We're just not there yet. So I don't know. I just thought that was just kind of a nice moment between them because I don't know, because I like that this being an episode that, for one, we learn a little bit more about Danny, but also that it was something that, you know, they were able to kind of bond. Because it's actually interesting because later on, Danny makes a point to be like, actually, I thought we were very different, but we're actually kind of the same. Because we end up finding out, like, the reason why she trusts Estime so much to be like, he's not a killer, he isn't this type of person, because he saved her life. Because she was a hostess, she was undercover and everything, and when she was overdosing, no one cared about her except for Estime. He actually took her to the hospital and everything. So it's like the guy who valued my life, someone that he didn't have to, a life that no one else valued, that type of person wouldn't kill Desir no matter what the circumstances may have been. And I wondered if that's what the case was, because Gil was kind of like, whoa, if drugs are in there, like, Danny, are you okay? And it's like, I was like, oh, so she must have had a drug problem back in the day. And it turns out, because obviously it kind of fit the nature of her being undercover. I think that's sadly, I mean, at least how shows, you know, show it. I mean, I'm not trying to make parallels to real life, but just from other crime dramas of the similar nature of like narcotics, the, you know, police unit, that tends to be the thing of like, you kind of steep your world, you get surrounded by all that money, power, and drugs that obviously you have to play the role to fit in, but eventually it just kind of takes you in. I mean, I'm sure being someone who might have issues already there, that on the top of it just kind of fuels that spiral even more. So it seems like she's been clean for a while, because even Estime had said like, you look better than the last time I saw you, and I guess that was like around the time she was probably probably trying to get clean, or it might even been straight up the last time when she overdosed might have been it. Well, it's also interesting too is Estime was the only one who found out she was a cop. He never told anyone else because he cared for Danny. He wanted to protect her, because if anyone ever found out, she'd be dead, you know. So that's those circumstances. But then we end up finding out that this is all about a woman named Fabula, and she was someone that Estime had fallen in love with, but Desir wasn't willing to give her up, so he turns into a drug mule, the balloon bust, and she ended up, I'm assuming, kind of dying from an overdose, which is kind of sad because, you know, whereas, you know, Estime was able to save her from an overdose. Like, obviously that's like the most extreme overdose. So I don't know if there's any like saving someone when all of that kind of hits your system all at once in that regard. So I don't know if there's a fixing that, but it's so sad because it's like, for Estime, it's like he fell in love with this woman. They were going to have a life. He could get away from all of this, pull her out of this, but, you know, sadly it didn't work out. So it seems like Estime's the one behind it, but it's not. It's the lady Trini, because it turns out she's actually Fabula. That was her mom. Trini's her mom. And obviously, like, because I did like that they kind of circle back to something I hadn't even thought about. It's like, right, they had made a point earlier on to be like, there was no blood from like the cut that killed Desir, like in his throat. So it's like, why was there no blood? Like there was something covering it, and it was like, all right, these are waterproof. So I was like, oh, that's so interesting, you know. And now it's like Trini just needed to get revenge for her little girl, because she wasn't even able to bury her little girl because they left her body. They buried her body in just some random meadow, you know. And it's just, you know, obviously she meant a lot to Estime, but I think for Trini, it doesn't matter. It's like, you loved her, whatever. The fact is, you didn't do anything when Desir did this. For one, it's like you didn't stop him before it happened. You didn't do anything afterwards, you know, because for him, it's like no matter what the circumstances is, he was caught in that rough place of like, he loved this woman and that hurt him, but at the same time, Desir was like a brother to him, his friend. So it's like, that added a whole complicated nature to it. But luckily they were able to kind of stop Trini from killing him, because it's like, would you prefer revenge or being able to give a proper burial to your little girl? And so there's that. And then there's the whole thing of like getting Saulo to think that that Estime was dead. I guess because now that Desir is dead, like I'm sure Saulo wants to kill Estime, because it's like, oh, now they can kind of run that. I mean, I'm curious because, I mean, it doesn't get answered, but like, who's going to take over, like, you know, Desir's gang now, especially if Estime's believed to be dead, but obviously he's getting a fresh start, you know? So I think that's what that whole Saulo thing is. They never really went into that, but I'm assuming that's what it was. It's like, oh, he's going to be the potential next leader, so let's take him out beforehand so we can kind of garnish some of this, you know, cut off the head of this snake, before it grows back, essentially. That's what I'm thinking, but maybe that's not the case. So it's actually interesting. Like I had brought up earlier, like the fact is Gil had saved, the fact is they found common ground because Gil has saved them both. Like Danny from her situation beforehand, he kind of brought her under his wing and everything. Because it's like, oh, she started doing her own profiling and stuff like that. And she's like, I learned from the best. And I'm not going to be like, thanks. And she's like, I actually was talking about Gil. But even the fact is that Gil ended up, taking Malcolm on stakeouts because I guess he saw something in Malcolm because he also saw like everything that Malcolm had been through. The fact is, it's like this kid saved my life. So it's actually kind of interesting how it all kind of comes full circle because Malcolm had warned him, is like, don't be alone, don't drink my dad's drink, he's going to try and kill you. So it's like, yeah, like it almost kind of comes full circle in many different regards. So like I said, I do like the fact is it did bring Danny and Malcolm closer. And once again, kind of fueling this tragedy, it's like there was some, once again, some silver lining to it, but at the same time, it's still just kind of like just a sad story, like almost this Romeo and Juliet-esque story, still ending tragedy because like, Trini's able to bury her daughter, but now she has to be in jail for those murders and everything. But also, Danny can't celebrate the case because for her, it's like she blames herself to a certain extent because she was pulled out August and they brought in Fabiola in October. So she feels like because I got replaced, I was replaced by her, it ended up putting her in that position. So it's like if I was still under, maybe I could have taken her on. I could have been the person that's there to look after her best interest, So maybe she kind of feels like maybe I could have done something different. But it's like that's the thing. Like you'll never know if things would have been different. That's the sad thing about the situation. So. I like that, like I said, Malcolm, like slowly but surely, like the whole JT thing, like was that last episode, he's kind of lowering, like, JT's guard or whatever a little bit. And now it's like, oh, we see him kind of bonding with Danny and even them becoming legitimate friends. I thought that was kind of like a neat element to it. It is interesting, though, that we do because of the combination of losing sleep, not sleeping, and being on drugs, has sent Malcolm spiraling a bit. The fact of the matter is he saw a station wagon. He sees like a cloth and a chain, and he's like, wait, what's going on? But it was a dog. So it's like, I need to get sleep. He starts seeing that everywhere. Like when he was at the church, he starts freaking out because he's like, it's not there. It's not there. But now like his subconscious is trying to get him to realize something, and so his world, his dreams are starting to impact reality, just because, which is interesting because, because obviously once again, the actor who played, Malcolm played Jesus on The Walking Dead. It's kind of interesting, just like week-wise, because literally the next day of after like, literally Carol kind of dealing with a similar thing, in The Walking Dead. It's just interesting the parallels there. I'm thinking too much and bringing connections where there don't need to be any, but I just think it's kind of funny when you actually kind of think about it in the grand scheme of things. But regardless, I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but I just thought it was kind of interesting. And also like, when he was, in his like hyperactive state, the fact of the matter is he's like, wait, I'm in my dad's cell, but then looks and it's not his dad, it's him dressed up like his dad. So it brings this whole thing of like, okay, so obviously his subconscious is trying to tell him something, but what? And and I guess maybe that could be foreshadowing and warning, like, oh, a little bit of your dad is there in you. It's like, and his dad kept being like, oh yeah, what why can't you remember? What did you do? Almost making it seem like Malcolm was complicit in whatever went down. It's almost like, because it's almost like it's foreshadowing that, a little bit of the surgeon exists in him. Like his father's proclivities are passed down to him in some genetic way, or maybe like the trauma of all of that they've been through, combined with maybe some genetic disposition, might be leading Malcolm down the path of going from solving murders to actually committing them. Like I said, if they decide to go down a little bit of the Hannibal route, if they decide to go down that lane, ultimately we kind of have to, wait and see. But I don't know if it seemed like that's something that they might be, potentially hinting at, and that might be potential direction that they kind of, potentially take it. I keep saying that over and over again. As in the wise words of Hector Navarro, the potentiality of it. Regardless, God, I'm so stupid. I apologize, but nevertheless. There was also this interesting thing, kind of other plot to the episode too. I thought was kind of neat. Is the fact is Jessica is trying to, spread more about like the fact is hiding in the shadows, doing her like more, charitable work. It's like no, maybe I should be more out front because like the fact is if I'm shown to be like, hey, I'm the forefront of kind of this charitable work, my name and reputation will be enough to kind of draw in more eyes, so it can do even more good. Is kind of her thought process. So she tries to meet up with different people that she's in organizations with, but no one shows up at the dinner she has planned because no matter what the circumstances, no matter what good she does, it's always going to be the thing of like, oh, but that's Miss Whitley, the wife of the surgeon, which once she brought that up last episode, the whole like fact that she has to deal with scrutiny from other people being like, oh, did you really know? Like whether the case may be that people will actually bring it up. Obviously that was something earlier back then, but I think even now that's probably looks that she gets, and even if that's not the case, it's still you're always going to be associated to everything that Martin did. So that's the complication in that route. But it turns out there's someone that shows up, a lady named Eve, who is an attorney who is trying to stop human trafficking, and she's willing to work with Jessica. I even love her joking, being like, I won't judge you for your exes if you don't judge me for mine. So kind of looking past all that. And it brought up an interesting conversation of, well, why did you keep the name Whitley? Because for her, it's like she was able to do a lot of good with the name Whitley. Plus, she's had it a lot longer. She was a Whitley longer than she was a Milton. But I thought it was kind of neat because it's like that name did a lot of good. Granted, my husband tarnished it by all this that he's done. He's taken a lot from me, but I won't let him take the good that has come from that name, what the good I've done with that name. So I thought that was kind of a neat reason to keep the name. But I also thought it was kind of neat that Malcolm kind of walks in and meets Eve. At first, like the way they were reacting to each other, I was like, oh, is he, do they actually know each other ahead of time? But like that was never hinted. That's what I was wondering at first, but it's like, oh no, there's something there. And it's like, oh, I think we're going to, and you must see this look in Jessica's face looking like, wait, kind of seeing, him acting like that and seeing her kind of all smiles and engaging in conversation with him. Because even he had talked about the fact is, friendship isn't something that, and once again, another thing him and Danny bonded over is the fact is, when it comes to friends, it's not really the easiest thing for either one of them, because obviously Danny kind of has trust issues, and obviously Malcolm, because of the way his brain works, the way he is with everything associated with his family, not the easiest thing to kind of have friends. Any friends he probably did have back then, any friends he has as a kid, probably were pulled away by their parents and stuff like that because the kids probably didn't understand. And so growing up, you probably still have that following you around. So hence why he uses, a different name. He uses Bright. But at the same time, it's still that probably would permeate be the word I'm looking for? Maybe. That just, it follows you. So, just that. And like I said, him just being who he is potentially kind of alienates people to a certain extent, So, I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But he even brought up the fact is that, when it comes to companionship, we don't know if he's ever really been in any relationships. We know Idrissa really likes him, and they kind of have almost like this interesting, weird, flirty relationship to a certain extent. But beyond that, it seems like we're setting something up with that Eve thing. I would not be surprised if we got the situation of Jessica being like, oh, hey, Malcolm, oh, look who it is, Eve. Like, she might be trying to play matchmaker of like, hey, there's something there, Because he had brought up the fact it's like, oh, my job's boring. And she's like, oh, the fact is it ends up with, drugs exploding. Can't be that boring. He's like, oh, it's not always boring. But I'm like, that just seemed like something was kind of sparked there. So we'll see ultimately where that kind of ends up taking us. But the big thing is obviously the box that his subconscious was trying to tell him about. Like some of it's the only thing left that his mom didn't burn of anything associated with Martin, because she wanted to erase him, pretending like he didn't exist. Because, the memories are already there. You don't need extra memories on top of that to remind you of everything. You kind of want to move on. But his mom ended up giving the box to him. But now it's like, okay, so there's the station wagon. So a lot of the stuff that he was seeing isn't 100% in his head, that it was something there. So it's like maybe him and his dad went on a trip, and on that trip his dad kidnapped someone and drugged them and brought them back. And maybe he, maybe Malcolm blocked all of it from a traumatic point of just like, oh, the trauma of it made him forget. But maybe the person that was in the back of the wagon is the same person from the chest, the box. Maybe it's someone that Malcolm had actually met, like, well, him and his dad were on this trip. Maybe it's a fishing trip, hunting trip, whatever the case may be. Obviously, hunting trip. And fishing trip, if you want to go as far as being like, oh, you can look at the parallels there of him fishing or him hunting, you know, for his next prey or whatever. So I'm very interested to ultimately see where that ends up taking us, like going down this route to like see what it is that's buried there, that maybe there is another person that Malcolm isn't aware of. Once again, it could be just a thing of like, the reason why Malcolm can't remember is like, what did you do? It's because maybe this was Martin's way to kind of bring Malcolm into the fold. Maybe he didn't commit all the way, but maybe Martin kind of pushed him in the direction of like, oh yeah, this being your first kill or, you know, kidnapping or whatever the case may be, that this might have been the first steps to him going down that route, the same route as his father, as I was talking about earlier. So like I said, we'll ultimately have to wait and see where that ends up all being in the future. Obviously, a storyline we didn't even touch this episode. It's kind of interesting because we only see him in flashbacks and stuff, but there was actually nothing with Martin this particular episode, because obviously we still have to pick up with the storyline of Ainsley visiting him last episode, so that was something touched at all, but maybe that's something we'll get to next episode. So, but really, that's all I'm going to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.